How my wife's open marriage proposal unveiled a shocking affair with her best friend. I'm a 36-year-old man, and my wife, Mia, is 34. We've been married for 7 years, and I thought we had a strong relationship. Things started to change about 6 months ago, though. Mia began talking about how relationships evolve and hinted that we should try something new to spice things up. First, I thought she was just talking about traveling more or doing something different for our date nights, but it quickly became clear that wasn't what she had in mind. One evening, while we were relaxing after dinner, she asked me how I would feel about an open marriage. I was stunned. This wasn't something we had ever discussed before, and I wasn't sure where it was coming from. Mia explained that she had been reading some articles and had spoken to some of her friends who had tried it. According to her, it had worked out well for them and even brought them closer as a couple. At first, I didn't know what to say. I asked her why she thought this was a good idea, and she told me that she loved me deeply, but felt like there was something missing. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked if she was unhappy with our marriage, and she reassured me that she was, but she believed that opening things up would make it even better. I told her I wasn't comfortable with the idea, and we left it at that for the time being. However, as the weeks went by, she kept bringing it up. It started to feel like she was subtly pressuring me into agreeing. Whenever we'd go out with friends, she'd point out couples who seemed like they had an open relationship, saying things like, "Look how happy they are." I didn't know if I was being paranoid, but it seemed like Mia was getting closer to one of her best friends, Katie. They started hanging out more often, and it felt like every time I came home from work, Katie would be there. One Friday night, Mia sat me down again and brought up the open marriage idea, but this time with more determination. She said that she had been talking to Katie and her husband Mark about the concept and that they were considering it too. I was shocked. Not only had she been thinking about this for months, but now she was involving her best friend in the conversation. Couldn't help but wonder if Mia already had someone in mind. That thought kept nagging at me. I tried to push it away, but the more I thought about it, the more I became suspicious. Mia assured me that it wasn't about any one person, it was just about exploring new experiences. I couldn't shake the feeling, though. Why was she so adamant about this all of a sudden? Why was Katie suddenly such a big part of our lives? A few weeks later, Mia asked me if we could have Katie and Mark over for dinner to discuss things. I agreed, but I felt uneasy about it. That night, while we were having dinner, the topic of open relationships came up again. It was clear that Mia and Katie had been talking about it a lot. They seemed almost excited about the idea, while Mark and I exchanged awkward glances. I wasn't sure if he was genuinely interested in this, or if he was just going along with it for Katie's sake. I could tell he was uncomfortable too. After dinner, when Katie and Mark left, I confronted Mia. I asked her if there was something going on between her and Katie. She laughed it off and told me I was being ridiculous. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I started paying closer attention to her behavior. The way she'd smile when Katie texted her, how secretive she became about her phone, and how she would spend more time running errands with Katie than she ever had before. One night, while Mia was out with Katie, I decided to do something I'd never done before. Checked her phone. I hated the idea of snooping, but I couldn't help it. I needed to know what was going on. When I opened her messages, I found nothing unusual at first, but then I saw a hidden conversation in a chat app we rarely use. It was filled with messages between Mia and Katie, talking about how they couldn't wait to be together again, and how they'd been keeping everything a secret from Mark and me. I felt like my entire world had come crashing down around me. Couldn't believe it. Mia had been cheating on me with her best friend, the very person she had brought into our lives more and more over the past few months. The open marriage idea wasn't about exploring or strengthening our relationship. It was about justifying the affair she was already having. I took screenshots of the messages and waited for Mia to come home. When she walked through the door, I asked her how her night was, trying to keep my voice calm. She smiled and said it was great, that she and Katie had had a lot of fun, That's when I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot. Her face went pale. She stumbled over her words, trying to come up with an excuse, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I told her I knew everything and that our marriage was over. She begged me to listen, saying that it wasn't what it looked like, but I was done. I packed a bag that night and left. The next day, I called Mark and told him what I had found. He was devastated. We decided to confront them together, to let them know that we were done playing their game. That evening, we went to Katie's house, where Mia and Katie were. They looked shocked when they saw both of us together, and we told them that we knew everything. I'll never forget the look on their faces as we laid out all the evidence, the messages, the lies, the manipulation. They tried to apologize, to explain, but there was no going back from this. Mark and I left together, knowing that our marriages were over, but at least we had the truth. I want to say that my wife's suggestion of an open marriage seemed to come out of nowhere. But in hindsight, there were warning signs all along. My name is John, and I've been married to Melissa for 7 years. We met in college, and what we had felt genuine, pure, even. We were the couple that friends envied. The ones who seemed to have it all. Good jobs, a nice home, and plans for a family. Things were stable, or so I thought. Melissa's suggestion of opening our marriage came during what felt like a casual conversation over dinner one Friday evening. I remember the moment so clearly because it hit me like a truck. She casually brought it up as if she were suggesting a new restaurant to try. "What do you think about opening things up a little?" she asked, eyes down at her plate. I paused, hoping she meant something like a new hobby or a vacation plan. But then she elaborated. "I mean, maybe we could explore other people. I've been reading that it's healthy for marriages, to keep things exciting." I put my fork down. "Are you serious?" I asked, my stomach turning. The idea of sharing my wife, even hypothetically, made me feel ill. "Just think about it," she pressed. "It doesn't mean anything will change between us. It's just physical. It might even strengthen what we have. We wouldn't be doing anything behind each other's backs, and we could be completely honest." I sat there in silence for a while, trying to process what she was suggesting. I wanted to believe her. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being too old-fashioned or closed-minded. I loved her, and if this was something she needed, maybe I should at least consider it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Over the next few days, the conversation continued to linger in my mind. Melissa didn't push me further, but I caught her browsing articles on open relationships, listening to podcasts on the subject. It seemed to become an obsession for her, and it made me uncomfortable. About 2 weeks later, she mentioned it again. This time, it wasn't a suggestion. It was more of a statement. "I've been thinking, John, I really want to try this. It's not that I don't love you. I just want to know what else is out there, and I want you to have that too. We could make it fun." Fun? I wasn't interested in fun if it meant losing the woman I loved. I told her I didn't think I could do it, that I wasn't comfortable with the idea. She nodded, said she understood, but there was a disappointment in her eyes. That's when things started changing. Melissa began staying out later, going out with friends more often, but not the friends I knew. She became more distant, more secretive. When I asked her about it, she'd brush it off. "Oh, just the girls from work. You wouldn't know them." Or, "I just need some time to myself, John. I'm not doing anything wrong." It wasn't that I didn't trust her, but the sudden shift in her behavior was unsettling. I found myself wondering who she was texting late at night, why she was suddenly spending so much time on her phone. But I didn't want to be that guy. The paranoid husband who accuses his wife of cheating just because she wants more independence. So, I stayed quiet. But the more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. Melissa would come home late, sometimes not until after midnight. And when I asked her where she had been, she'd give vague answers. "Just out with the girls, we lost track of time," she'd say, or "we went for drinks after work, nothing serious." Yet, her stories never quite added up. One evening, while she was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. First, I didn't find much. Few harmless text messages from her friends, some work-related chats. But then I noticed one name that kept coming up. Becca. Becca wasn't a friend I had ever heard of before. and the texts between them seemed strange. There were a lot of inside jokes, comments about last night being amazing, and we have to do that again soon. My stomach dropped. Was this the friend Melissa had been going out with? It didn't sound like the casual girls' night she had been describing. I scrolled further, and that's when I found the pictures. They weren't explicit, but they were enough to confirm my worst fears. Melissa and Becca were much closer than just friends. There were selfies of them together at bars, at parks, even at someone's house that I didn't recognize. In one of the pictures, Becca was leaning her head on Melissa's shoulder, her hand resting on my wife's thigh. I felt sick to my stomach. I wasn't sure what to think. Was this part of the open marriage she had been hinting at? Or was she just flat out cheating on me? Either way, it felt like a betrayal. I confronted her that night. She denied it at first, said I was overreacting, that Becca was just a close friend. But when I showed her the messages and the pictures, her face turned pale. I thought we were going to talk about this, she finally said, her voice shaking. I thought you wanted to try something new too. Couldn't believe what I was hearing. This isn't what I agreed to, Melissa. You're sneaking around behind my back with someone else. This isn't an open marriage. This is cheating. She started crying, saying she didn't know how to handle her feelings, that she hadn't meant for things to get this far. She kept apologizing, but at that point, I wasn't sure if I could ever trust her again. I decided I needed to know the full extent of what was going on. So I hired a private investigator. Felt extreme, but I needed to know if Becca was the only one, or if there were others. I wasn't going to be left in the dark anymore. What the investigator uncovered blew my world apart. Not only was Melissa seeing Becca, but she had also been meeting up with her best friend, Rachel, in secret. Rachel, who had been in our wedding party. Rachel, who had been my friend too. I was devastated. It turned out that while Melissa had been pushing me to consider an open marriage, she had already started living one, without my consent. She and Rachel had been involved for months, sneaking around whenever I was out of town or working late. When I confronted her with the evidence, Melissa broke down completely. She begged for forgiveness, claimed it had been a mistake, that she didn't want to lose me. But the damage was done. I wasn't just dealing with infidelity anymore. I was dealing with the fact that the two women I had trusted the most had betrayed me together. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat at the kitchen table, feeling like the walls were closing in on me. Tom didn't say a word. He just stood there, looking out the window with an expression of profound sadness. I wanted to reach out to him, to bridge the chasm that had opened between us, but I wasn't sure how. The conversation with Emily and Daniel had only made things worse, highlighting the depth of the fracture in our family. Tom finally turned to me, his face etched with exhaustion. "Lisa, I don't know how we're going to get through this," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Feels like everything we've built is falling apart." "I know," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I made a terrible mistake, and I wish I could go back and change it." He shook his head, his eyes filled with despair. "You can't change the past, and now we have to deal with the consequences." We sat in silence for what felt like hours. Tom eventually retreated to his room, leaving me alone in the darkened kitchen. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had done and how I could possibly make amends. The next morning, Tom was gone. He left for work without saying goodbye. I wasn't sure if this was a sign that he was trying to avoid me, or if he simply needed space. I decided to spend the day trying to clean up the mess I had made, both literally and figuratively. I spent hours cleaning the house, hoping that somehow it would help to clear my mind, and maybe even mend some of the damage. When Tom came home that evening, he was more distant than ever. He barely acknowledged my presence, simply going to his room and shutting the door behind him. I knew I needed to give him space, but it was so hard to see him shutting me out. That night, I decided to reach out to Emily and Daniel, hoping to make amends with them. I called them both, but they were still too hurt to talk. Emily's voice was strained, and she told me she needed time. Daniel was even more distant, saying he wasn't ready to speak with me. I felt a deep sense of loss. My children were angry with me, and my husband was emotionally distant. I was left with nothing but the overwhelming guilt of my past actions and the fear of losing everything I held dear. The days turned into weeks, and things didn't seem to improve. Tom continued to go to work and come home without acknowledging me. He had installed a lock on the master bedroom, and he was keeping to his own space. I stayed in the guest room, trying to respect his need for distance, while hoping for a chance to rebuild what we had lost. I continued to send Tom heartfelt messages, pouring my heart out in each one, but he never responded. It felt like I was shouting into the void, with no way to reach him or show him how truly remorseful I was. One day, as I was cleaning out the garage, I found an old box of family photos and mementos. I pulled out a photo album and began flipping through the pages, remembering the good times we had shared over the years. Each photo was a reminder of the love and happiness we once had, and it made the current situation feel even more painful. I decided to write Tom a letter, hoping that putting my feelings into words might help him understand my perspective. I spent hours crafting the letter, carefully choosing each word to express my regret, my love for him, and my hope for our future. I placed the letter on his desk, hoping that he would read it and see the sincerity in my words. That evening, I waited anxiously for Tom to come home. When he did, he found the letter and took it to his room without saying a word. I waited for him to come out, to at least acknowledge that he had read it, but he remained silent. The next morning, I found the letter on the kitchen table, folded neatly, but with no indication that Tom had read it. I felt a pang of disappointment, tried to stay hopeful. I knew that healing would take time, and I had to be patient. Meanwhile, my interactions with Emily and Daniel remained strained. They had both been distant, and while I understood their need for time, it was heartbreaking to see the distance growing between us. I tried to stay positive, hoping that eventually they would come around and understand that I was committed to making things right. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Tom came into the kitchen and unexpectedly started helping with the meal. It was the first time in weeks that we had shared any kind of interaction that wasn't tinged with anger or sadness. We worked side by side in silence. The only sounds were the clinking of utensils and the occasional sigh. As we sat down to eat, Tom finally broke the silence. "I read your letter," he said quietly. "It was touching." I looked at him, my heart racing. "Tom, I'm so sorry. I know my actions hurt you, and I can't tell you how much I regret it. I just want us to find a way to move forward." He nodded slowly. "I know you're sorry, I can see that, but it's going to take time for me to process everything. I need to figure out how I feel and what I want." I felt a glimmer of hope. "I understand. I'm willing to wait, as long as it takes. I love you, Tom, and I want to work through this together." Tom didn't respond immediately, but he seemed to be considering my words. "We'll see," he said finally. "I need time to think." As the weeks passed, there were small signs of progress. Tom started talking to me more, though the conversations were often difficult and emotional. We began to slowly rebuild some of the trust that had been shattered, but it was clear the road to recovery was going to be long and challenging. In the meantime, I continued to reach out to Emily and Daniel, trying to show them that I was committed to making things right. I sent them messages of love and reassurance, and I hoped that eventually they would see that I was sincere in my efforts to repair our family. Despite the challenges, there were moments of hope. Tom and I had begun attending couples therapy, which provided a space for us to talk through our issues, the help of a professional. It was a difficult process, but I believed it was necessary for our healing. One day, Emily and Daniel came over for dinner. It was the first time we had all been together in weeks, and I was nervous but hopeful. As we sat around the table, I could see the pain and uncertainty in their eyes. There was also a glimmer of hope. "Mom, Dad," Emily said, looking at us both, "we know things have been really tough and we're still processing everything. But we want you to know that we love you both and hope that you can find a way through this." Daniel nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's been hard to understand everything, but we want to support you both as best as we can." Tears welled up in my eyes and I felt a wave of relief. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "I know we have a long road ahead, but I'm grateful for your support. I love you both so much." Tom reached out and took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. We still had a long way to go, but for the first time in weeks, there was a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal and move forward together. The road to recovery was still uncertain, but I was determined to keep trying, to show Tom and my children that I was committed to making things right. Despite the pain and the challenges, I held on to the hope that our family could come back stronger and that we could find a way to rebuild the trust and love that had been so deeply affected. Certainly, here's the continuation in English. After that night, my life was in chaos. It was hard to look at Melissa without feeling a mix of anger, disappointment, and sadness. The woman I had vowed to love and protect had betrayed me in ways I could never have imagined. And it wasn't just betrayal with one person. It was with two. Two people who were part of our circle of trust, and that made it even more devastating. The days that followed were suffocating. I wanted answers, but at the same time, I knew that digging deeper would only bring more pain. Melissa tried to win me back, saying she was confused, that she didn't know what she was feeling, that she had made a mistake getting involved with Rachel and Becca. She said she still loved me, that she wanted to fix things. But how could I believe that? Rachel, on the other hand, didn't reach out. She disappeared, probably out of shame or fear of facing the consequences of what she had done. I had known her for years, and her betrayal was almost as painful as Melissa's. I couldn't understand how she had been able to deceive me in that way, smiling at me while being involved with my wife behind my back. Days turned into weeks, and I could barely stay at home. Every corner of the house was infused with memories that now seemed distorted, tainted. Every shared laugh, every moment of intimacy that I thought was only ours, now felt like a lie. I started spending more time at work, taking any excuse to stay away from home. Nights, however, were lonely. I was drowning in thoughts, trying to make sense of it all. One of the few nights I decided to face Melissa, she tried once again to convince me to talk. "John, I love you. Please, we can get through this. We can go to therapy, try again. I was selfish, and I know I hurt you, but I don't want to lose you." Looking at her, I saw desperation in her eyes, but all I felt was coldness. I loved her, but what she had done destroyed any foundation of trust between us. "You want to save our marriage now, after all this? After hiding what you were doing, lying to my face?" My voice was heavy with pain, but I refused to show weakness in front of her. She lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what got into me. I thought that, I don't know, John. I was lost, confused." Confused? I laughed, but it was a bitter laugh, filled with resentment. "You were quite clear when you decided to be with Rachel and Becca. Where was this confusion when you were meeting behind my back?" She started sobbing, but at that moment, her tears did nothing to move me. I was exhausted. The weight of the situation was draining my energy, and all I wanted was an exit. Then an idea began to form in my mind. It might not have been the most mature or moral, but it gave me a sense of control that I hadn't felt in weeks. If Melissa had destroyed me emotionally, maybe I could return the favor. If she wanted a game, I was ready to play. Without her knowing, I began to plan my revenge. In the following days, I pretended to consider her proposal of therapy and reconciliation. I even suggested that we should spend some time apart to reflect on everything. I told her I needed space, and she agreed. Melissa started going out more, perhaps relieved to think I was willing to try again. What she didn't know was that during this time I was taking notes, gathering evidence. I knew that if I wanted to end the marriage, I had to do it right. And I wanted to leave this situation with my head held high. I hired lawyers and prepared a divorce case. But it wasn't just that. I had something more in mind. One night, while she was out, probably with one of her lovers, I gathered the messages, photos, and evidence of the betrayal. Not just for the divorce, for something more impactful. Rachel was married too, and her husband Tom had always been a nice guy, never suspecting a thing. I decided he deserved to know. I sent all the evidence to Tom, detailing everything I had discovered about Rachel's affair with Melissa. I knew it would likely destroy their marriage, but at that moment, it seemed fair. I wanted Rachel to feel the pain of betrayal, just as I had. I also sent the evidence to Melissa's parents. They had always treated me like a son, and I knew it would devastate them. But I wanted them to know who their daughter really was. I knew Melissa would be confronted by them, and that would add to her burden more than any argument between us. But I didn't stop there. I decided that Becca wouldn't go unpunished either. I learned, through the investigator, that she was in a serious relationship with a woman named Julia. And just like I did with Tom, I sent everything to Julia. I knew I was creating a domino effect of destruction, but at that moment it felt just. The messages were sent that night. I sat and waited for Melissa's world to crumble. And crumble it did. The next morning, Melissa came home, and I saw panic in her eyes. She knew. Her parents had called, furious. Rachel was facing hell with Tom, and Becca apparently had been kicked out by Julia. Melissa tried to talk to me, but I was already beyond the point of wanting an explanation. You threw away everything we had, I told her with cold calmness. Now, you'll deal with the consequences. She tried to convince me to reconsider the divorce, said she was willing to do anything to fix things. But I had already decided. The trust was shattered, and there was no going back. The following months were tough. The divorce was a long and draining process, but I moved forward. Melissa, on the other hand, saw her life fall apart. Her friends distanced themselves, her family condemned her, and the affair with Rachel and Becca ended up being exposed to everyone. She had thrown it all away for a fling and now faced the consequences. As for me, I finally began to rebuild my life, slowly. In the end, I realized that true love isn't just about forgiveness, but also about mutual respect and trust. And when that's broken, sometimes the best thing to do is to move on. The aftermath of the revelations was chaotic for everyone involved. Melissa's life was in shambles. She moved out of the house and had to find a new place to live, a reality she faced with a mix of shock and disbelief. Her parents, once supportive, now looked at her with disappointment and anger. They had always considered me a good match for her, and the way she had handled everything had shattered their image of her. Rachel faced her own storm. Tom, devastated and heartbroken, confronted her with the evidence. Their marriage, which had once seemed solid, unraveled quickly. Tom filed for divorce, and Rachel found herself isolated, her reputation tarnished. The pain she felt was immense, and it was something I understood all too well. But it didn't lessen the satisfaction I felt knowing she was getting a taste of the betrayal she had inflicted. Becca's situation was equally tumultuous. Julia, her partner, was furious upon discovering the affair. Becca had been forced to leave her apartment and was scrambling to find a place to stay. The fallout from her relationship was intense, and her reputation took a hit. I had hoped that by exposing her involvement, she would understand the gravity of her actions. As for me, the process of moving on was slow but steady. The divorce proceedings were grueling, but in the end, I managed to get a fair settlement. The legal battles were draining, but they provided a sense of closure that I desperately needed. I focused on rebuilding my life, finding solace in the small things. I took up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and even sought therapy to work through the emotional scars. During this time, I began to see a therapist regularly. It was a crucial step in processing the trauma I had experienced and learning how to trust again. Therapy helped me understand that my feelings of anger and betrayal were natural, but it also guided me in finding ways to heal and move forward. I started to focus on personal growth and self-improvement, something that had taken a back seat during the tumultuous period of my marriage. I also made a conscious effort to stay away from the dating scene for a while. The idea of entering a new relationship felt daunting, and I needed time to rediscover myself and my priorities. I focused on my career, which had been overshadowed by the drama in my personal life. As I regained my footing, I started to feel more confident and optimistic about the future. Months passed, and the intensity of the past began to fade into a distant memory. The pain and heartbreak, though still present, became more manageable. I began to see the experience not just as a period of loss, but as a catalyst for personal growth. I had been through a storm, but I was emerging stronger and more self-aware. One day I received a call from Tom, Rachel's ex-husband. He wanted to meet and discuss how we were both coping with the aftermath. It was a strange but cathartic conversation. Tom and I bonded over our shared experiences and mutual betrayal. We both agreed that while the situation had been devastating, it had also provided us with a clearer understanding of ourselves and our needs. Tom and I ended up becoming friends of sorts. We supported each other in our respective healing processes and occasionally shared updates about our progress. It was a reminder that even in the midst of pain, unexpected connections could be forged. As for Melissa, she eventually reached out one last time, asking if we could meet for closure. I agreed to a meeting, hoping to find some resolution. When we met, she was a shadow of her former self, a stark contrast to the person she had once been. She apologized profusely, expressing regret for her actions and acknowledging the pain she had caused. It was a moment of raw honesty, but it did little to change the reality of what had happened. We parted ways with a sense of mutual understanding, but also acceptance of the finality of our separation. I realized that forgiveness was not about reconciling, but about finding peace within myself. Closure I sought was not in reuniting with Melissa, but in moving forward with my life. In the end, I learned that betrayal, while devastating, can also be a powerful teacher. It showed me the importance of self-respect, trust, and the strength to move on from what no longer serves you. The journey was painful, but it led me to a place where I could rebuild and find happiness again. As I closed this chapter of my life, I looked forward to a future that, while uncertain, was filled with new possibilities and opportunities for growth. I had faced the storm and emerged on the other side, ready to embrace whatever came next, hope and resilience. And so, the story of my heartbreak and recovery came to an end. It was a story of betrayal and loss, but also of healing and transformation. Life had thrown me into a whirlwind, but I had found my way back to solid ground. The road ahead was mine to navigate, and I was determined to make the most of it.